And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another installment of my DC Rebirth reading guide series. Today is video 3.7 in which we're going to specifically be covering Suicide Squad. Now this section 3 of my series has been Justice League and Suicide Squad, and the last 6 videos have all been Justice League, but today we are finally getting into, and in fact covering all of, Suicide Squad. As a quick intro to where this fits in, generally speaking, we have to remember I've read the entirety of the DC Rebirth era of comics by DC, so all 3,370 issues, give or take. And that includes all the various kind of ancillary bits, things like Black Label, out of continuity stuff, Deceased, and so on. We're now going through the core section of that universe. That's 2,724 single issues making up the core mainstream. What you can see here is the playlists on my channel. There's one playlist that contains all the videos as a whole, every single DC Rebirth thing I've ever done, but that's quite a lot. If you want a slightly more digestible playlist, there's 3 curated playlists that come out of this. One is for custom binds and custom comics from the DC Rebirth era. The other is for all the stuff that's non-core continuity, in other words things like Deceased, Licensed World, Out of Continuity, Black Label, and so on. And then the third one is what I call the core playlist, which is exactly things like this video and all the videos around it, which is the core mainstream DC universe continuity, and that's what today's video is part of. And like I say, today is in section 3 of the 10 sections that comprise the core mainstream universe, and this is now video 3.7. Last of all, I would remind you before you watch this video, if this is your first one, please go back and watch the introduction video for this series, video 0.0, because it sets the scene for this whole era, as well as where this fits in terms of the new 52 guide that I've done. It also covers key concepts that I'm going to refer to lots over the next 15 to 20 minutes, but I'm not going to explain again. Things like volumes with the big V, volumes with the small v, and also types P and J readers. Understanding those concepts is basically key to understand the videos in this guide. But with all that out of the way, with no further ado, let's dive into it. I'm about to show you the map in a second, but before I do, we just need to talk about Suicide Squad in general. And for this particular video, we're going to be talking about all the Suicide Squad issues published from 2016 to 2019 during DC Rebirth. So the rise in popularity of the Suicide Squad is an unusual thing to trace. The first Suicide Squad film, the one directed by David Ayer, was released in 2016 and was one of the reasons for the gentle relaunch of the Suicide Squad series in the middle or latter part of the New 52, in that it relaunched into the new Suicide Squad with a fresh #1 issue for collectors to chase. However, this movie wasn't hugely successful, and was then followed up by a film that was part reboot and part sequel, called The Suicide Squad as opposed to Suicide Squad, and that was directed by James Gunn and released in 2021. In this way, the two films provide neat bookends to the Suicide Squad series of the Rebirth era. That's both coincidental and ironic, but one of them launched in 2016 when Rebirth started, and the second one launched in 2021 when Rebirth ended. With that out of the way, let's have a look at the map. And here we go, back at the map. And again, this is the strategic level event-led map. As usual, we're going to do a quick recap here just to set context. So to start off with, we have covered Justice League and Justice League vs Suicide Squad. Continued on, covered JLA. We then covered all the major events. We've done Dark Knight's Metal, No Justice, Justice League, Drowned Earth, Year of the Villain, Dark Knight's Metal, and Endless Winter. We have covered literally all of this. If you're into the main Justice League, you would have covered all of that by following through this video. So with today's video in this set of videos, we're now looking at Suicide Squad 2016, which is here and starts at the same time as Justice League 2016. It then goes into the event Justice League vs Suicide Squad and then continues. It does cross over into Dark Knight's Metal. We will then see it in Sync Atlantis, and then it ends just before Drowned Earth. It's literally just this green line here. So that's what we're going to be covering today, and we're going to be covering it in a fair bit of detail. So as part of that, let's just remind ourselves this is the strategic level. Let's scroll down to the red map, and this is the granular level. So let's see where we are. As I've mentioned several times before, if you hover over the actual images, you'll see a little tooltip icon, which is always really useful. So we're going to be talking through Suicide Squad. Now, this series was almost entirely written by Rob Williams, who's a fellow British person, comic writer, based not too far away from me, actually. I've met him a couple of times at conventions, lovely guy. So this is written by Rob Williams, and in fact, the first 8 issues as a whole are written by Rob and drawn by Jim Lee. Now, the Jim Lee artwork is absolutely spectacular and stellar, and in fact, an unwrapped, oversized hardcover is available. The reason it's called unwrapped is because it will contain just the pencil sketch versions, but I'll talk about that more at the end of the video when I talk about the hardcover collected versions. Just zooming in a little bit further, what we have here is a trade paperback collection of one, which is called the Black Vault. It contains the Suicide Squad Rebirth one-shot, which we talked about way back in video 2.1. And then it contains issues 1 to 4 and the B-side stories. Now, it's worth just kind of clarifying what I mean here. Essentially, every single issue, at least for the first 8 issues of Suicide Squad, had an A-side story, which was the main story, and then it had a B-side story, which is essentially an origin story for a particular character. So in this case, issue 1 had a B-side story, which was a personnel file for Deadshot. Issue 2 had a B story about Boomerang. Issue 3 had a B story about Katana. And issue 4 had a B story around Rick Flag. Now, in the trade paperback, that's obviously if you read them all in singles. You read them in singles, you read the one-shot, then you read the 4 issues, the end. If you're reading it in the trade, it's the one-shot, and then issues 1 to 4, the A stories only, and then all the B stories, all the origin stories are lumped together at the end of the trade paperback. And that is what is collected here. Moving on over and having a look here, we've got volume 2. That's a volume with a small v, and it's called Going Sane. This just contains 4 issues. It's issues 5 to 8, so 5, 6, 7, and 8. And again, all the B stories for these 4 issues are all lumped together at the end of the trade paperback. So, to take it in order, issue 5 has a B story about the character Hack. Issue 6 has a B story about Croc. Issue 7 has a B story about Enchantress. And issue 8 has a B story, which is a Justice League and Suicide Squad prelude story. Right at the end, after the prelude story for Justice League and Suicide Squad, there's actually the April Fool's special. So the Suicide Squad April Fool's special, which, if you were to read it in single issues, says to be continued in issue 1. The fact that it's collected here is annoying and slightly out of context, but not the end of the world. Now, we did just talk about issue 8 having a B story, which is essentially the prologue or the prelude to Justice League versus Suicide Squad. And here we have Justice League versus Suicide Squad. Again, this is available as a trade paperback and as a standard size hardcover, but an oversized hardcover version of this as a discrete event book is not available. Anyway, issues 9 and 10 are in here. They are not collected in the trade. So the next trade is volume 3, volume with a small v, called Burning Down the House. That just contains issues 11 to 15. So like I say, issues 9 to 10 are in here, and then 11 to 15 are in volume 3. At this point, John Romita Jr. has taken over from the art from Jim Lee, so it no longer has the spectacular Jim Lee art. Moving on over, we've got volume with a small v4, which is called Earthlings on Fire. This just contains issues 16 to 20, but there are a couple of points here worth just making you aware of in case you're sort of worried about the wider metatextual context of Suicide Squad within DC Rebirth. Now, issue 19 has got Cyborg Superman and the Eradicator turning up fresh from the events of Action Comics 980. We're not going to cover the events of Action Comics 980, or in fact any Superman related stuff, until we get to section 8 of this series. All I will say is you don't need to know about that to read issue 19. Just read this trade paperback and treat yourself like a type J reader. Like some random point in issue 19, Cyborg Superman Eradicator turn up, fine. Smile, nod, carry on reading. That's all you need. Tony S. Daniels picks up art duties from issues 16 to 19. He's a much stronger artist in many ways than John Romita Jr., in my opinion. And then from issue 20, we start seeing a rotating cast of artists, I'm afraid. Speaking of which, if we move on to trade paperback volume 5, that's volume with a small v, it's called Kill Your Darlings, and contains issues 21 to 25. And again, a rotating cast of artists, even though it is written by Rob Williams. This takes us straight into this big grey box, which is, of course, the Dark Knight's Metal event. So let's zoom out a little bit. Let's zoom out a lot, in fact. Right, there we are. This is the Dark Knight Metal event. And in this case, one particular issue of Suicide Squad, which is issue 26, is here in the Resistance. You can even see Harley right there. So that's where issue 26 is. Don't bother reading it here, like just by itself, out of sequence. If you want to read issue 26, you're going to have to read the whole of Dark Knight's Metal. It makes no sense in and of itself. Even if you're a massive Suicide Squad fan, it just doesn't make any sense. So, moving on from Dark Knight's Metal, we're then back at Suicide Squad here. Like I said, rotating cast of artists. I believe Stefan Shezik did some of these covers or some of these issues. What we have is volume with a small v6, and this is the Secret History of Task Force X. So this particular trade collection collects issues 27 to 32. Again, as I say, rotating cast of artists. But anyway, you've got the 6 stories all written by Rob Williams. What I will point out as well is that each issue, if you're reading in single issues, contains part of a 6-part backup arc called King for a Day, which is all collected at the end of the trade paperback. Moving over here to volume 7, that's volume with a small v7, we have Drain the Swamp, which collects issues 33 to 40. It's worth noting the first 2 issues, 33 and 34, is a 2-parter written by Cy Spurrier, if you're a fan of him, but then after that it goes back to Rob Williams for the rest of the writing on that. And that then takes us almost finally to volume 8, again volume with a small v8, that is called Constriction, and you can see the picture here. Now this contains issues 41 to 44, then Annual 1, and then issues 47 to 50. What I will point out is that issue 41, so the first issue here, has got some fleeting references to issue 16 of the series Trinity, which again is over in the Superman section, section 8 of this guide, but you have absolutely no need to worry about that or to read Trinity. It's worth noting that then you have 41, 42, 43, 44. Then you have Annual 1, which is written by Colin Bunn, but is actually kind of parallel to the events in Sync Atlantis, which we'll talk about in just a second. Then you have issues 47, 48, 49, and issue 50 is a huge double-sized issue. And that is the entirety, really, when you think about it, of Suicide Squad. Let me just zoom out for a second. And here we are. So there's Suicide Squad. Those are the final 3 after Dark Knight's Metal. Now, it's worth noting there are a couple of events that happen after this. There is the Aquaman Suicide Squad crossover, which has got this collection here. And then, well, that's basically where the Suicide Squad line ends. But you know what? It's going to be easy to talk to you about that by talking through the reading order, which I'll do now. So we can see Sync Atlantis here. This is a single collected volume collecting the following 4 issues. As you can see, Suicide Squad 45, Aquaman 39, Suicide Squad 46, and Aquaman 40. It's a bit of a weird one because those 2 Suicide Squad issues are clearly in the middle of the last volume we were just talking about, volume 8, Constriction. That said, I don't really feel like you have to read this in the middle of that volume. You can, by all means you can. If you want, pick up Constriction, read the first few issues, and then when you get to Annual 1, put it down, read the Aquaman Sync Atlantis Suicide Squad crossover, read these 4 issues, put it down, and then read the rest of Constriction, so Annual 1, and then 47, 48, 49, and 50. You can do that if you want, but if you don't want to, you don't have to, because Constriction works pretty much fine by itself. Yes, it's got one fleeting reference to Sync Atlantis in the Annual, but it's not a massive deal. Not really. Just be relaxed about it. Be more of a Type J reader about it. So this is the Sync Atlantis event, and this is where it happens here. And this literally is the last thing of Suicide Squad you need to read in DC Rebirth. Whether you read it in the middle of Volume 8 Constriction or after Volume 8 Constriction is up to you. I personally would read it afterwards because it works fine then. More importantly, this is something we're going to come back to again in a later video, probably in Section 7, when we're looking at Aquaman, because actually the Sync Atlantis event, as you can see here, Aquaman 39, Aquaman 40, and then it moves seamlessly into the Justice League Drowned Earth event. Now this has Aquaman 41, Aquaman 42. So if you're reading Sync Atlantis, it really sets up Drowned Earth. But Drowned Earth, as we have discussed several times in quite a bit of detail, is part of the Justice League reading order, because Justice League kind of dominates this section. So it's kind of up to you. If I was you, I would just read the 8 trade paperbacks for Suicide Squad and just leave Sync Atlantis alone. You might want to read it as like a little bit of a taster before you read Drowned Earth whilst you're reading Justice League. Or you might want to read Sync Atlantis when you're doing your Aquaman read through if you get as far as Section 7 of this video guide. But in and of itself, like I say, Drowned Earth is the sequel to Sync Atlantis, and Sync Atlantis doesn't necessarily, it's not an obligatory tie-in for the Suicide Squad issues. Okay, well, with that out of the way, the last thing I wanted to talk about today was the beautiful deluxe hardcovers related to the Suicide Squad for this era. So let's dive into that. And here we are back at the map. As is tradition, I'm now going to show you on the map where the various rather gorgeous Rebirth Deluxe Edition hardcovers are, what they collect and what they don't collect. The first thing I want to do before we dive into talking about the actual Rebirth hardcovers is to mention again what I talked about when I said there's an unwrapped hardcover. This is what the cover of it looks like. There's several of these scattered around DC New 52 and DC Rebirth, and they're oversized hardcovers that just contain the pencil sketch artwork, and often the speech bubbles and the speech balloons inked and sort of, in bold and ink and so on. But the rest of it is all pencil sketch, black and white. They look beautiful. This is the one for Suicide Squad. It's really nice. It only contains the first 8 issues. So it's not the same contents as the first trade paperback, and it's not the same contents as the first oversized hardcover. It's its own distinct thing, which is just the Jim Lee issues. Anyway, this is beautiful. Anyway, what I was going to talk about was the Rebirth hardcovers. You can see them here, as usual, screenshot taken from Name and Condition, amazing YouTube channel. Please follow them instead of me. And what the Name and Condition video shows is all the Rebirth editions, but what I want to talk about is where they fit in on the map. So back to the map here. The first Suicide Squad Rebirth hardcover actually collects issues 1 to 8 in full. However, as we discussed before with these 2 specific trade paperbacks, it's a bit complicated because they've got A stories and they've got B stories. So what's collected here is the first 8 issues, the A stories only, and then all the B stories are lumped together at the end. The special thing worth noting is, if you recall, the second trade paperback, Going Sane, ended with an April Fool special that is actually set before issue 1. Well, actually, in the hardcover, the April Fool special is before issue 1, so they've got it in the right location. So the hardcover is a great way to read these 2 series. These 2 trade collections. So that's brilliant. That's covered. Moving on to the second hardcover. Now, as you'll remember from the map here, Volume 3 and Volume 4 contain issues 11 to 15 and 16 to 20, with issues 9 to 10 just being kind of orphaned because they're off in the Justice League versus Suicide Squad mini event. Annoyingly, however, the second oversized hardcover does not adhere to that. It starts off with the Suicide Squad special, War Crimes, which is written by John Ostrander himself. He's like the original OG from Suicide Squad back in the day. It then has issues 9 to 20. In other words, it has 2 random Justice League versus Suicide Squad tie-ins that sort of make sense, but don't really make sense by themselves. And then it has those 2 trade paperbacks. So that oversized hardcover does not contain, ideally, all the issues that you want in the sequence that they want, because frankly, as far as I'm concerned, issues 9 and 10 should not be included in here. What they should have done was produce a Justice League versus Suicide Squad oversized hardcover event book. So that is admittedly a little bit annoying. Finally, moving on, the third trade paperback, the third oversized Rebirth hardcover contains issues 21 to 32. That means it contains all of Volume 5 and Volume 6's trade paperbacks, volumes with the small v, which is fine, issues 21 to 32. But annoyingly, that also means it includes issue 26, which is a Dark Knight's Metal tie-in that makes absolutely no sense in this oversized hardcover by itself. So that's annoying. And then there is no further hardcovers. There's obviously the Drowned Earth event book, but like I say, that's not Suicide Squad. And then there's Sync Atlantis has its own book, but that's not an oversized hardcover either. So those are the three Justice League oversized hardcovers. The first one's good. The second and third one have their own problems. And frankly, I blame the DC intern for the way those are mapped. And back at the map. There we are. That's the end of it. This is the Suicide Squad run through. We finished it. We've gone through all of these. We've looked at these events. We've gone through these trades. We've looked at where it crosses over with Metal and the final trades here. And then with that out of the way, we then looked at Sync Atlantis, Drowned Earth, and the trades. That's basically it. That's all I wanted to cover today, really. Hopefully that's okay. Is this section here. What we're going to cover next time round is going to be, I think, Justice League Dark. So, yeah, if you're interested in Justice League Dark, that will be the next video in this series.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at @IamThomasJudge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.